500 years ago, he washed ashore the sole survivor of a shipwreck. And upon the skull of the man who killed his dad, he said, "I'm mad, I must eradicate piracy, injustice and cruelty, and all my sons will follow me, so evildoers will believe that this man cannot die."
G'day, this is X-Bands, the Phantom Podcast. Our website is chroniclechamber.com, and you can subscribe to our podcast via YouTube or through your favourite podcast apps. Today we are doing a special podcast focusing on the one story and the creative team behind it. We only do this on occasions, and this comic is 1925 from Frew. Where's the comic? There it is. This is the comic here, which features two stories. The classic Lee Falk and Wilson McCoy story in colour, The Masked Marvel, and a brand new sequel, Until the Final Bell by Paul Mason. We are joined by, or I am joined by the whole team. Dan and Steve, how are you guys?
Very, very well, thanks, Jim. Yourself?
Yeah, it's been a while since the three of us have been on, so it's good to have the three amigos back.
Yeah, I'm delighted to be here, and especially when you said that the creators from issue 1925 were going to be on the pod. I didn't realise that I thought you might be bringing back Lee Falk and Wilson McCoy actually for a second, but we've got all the living creators from this issue.
That's a special podcast for our Patreons only. So if you're one of our patrons, you'll be able to listen to that one. But yes, you're right. We do have Paul Mason, who is the creator behind the brand new sequel story, Until the Final Bell. Hello, Paul, or Dr. Paul. How are you?
Good, thanks, mate. How you doing? Hello, Jen.
Not bad. Thank you for joining us. It's been a while since we've had you on. I think it was the 2018 or 2019 Supernova special. I think was the last time you were on a podcast.
That's right. Yep.
And from what I understand, the Masked Marvel wasn't on the cards by then as well. So a lot has happened throughout those last couple of years.
Yeah, it was actually that con from memory when it was that con. Yeah, where Glenn pitched the idea of doing a boxing story. It wasn't specifically Masked Marvel at that point. I think Glenn, being the savvy creator he is, recognized the connection between, boxing, the Phantom, obviously wanting to do a boxing special, knowing my background and my love of the sport. And so I percolated on the idea, and at the time I think I'd just finished. No, it actually come out. That 2019 annual came out in January. That one that I wrote and drew for the Vietnam story. So I was thinking of this kind of little short story of the Phantom and his inner monologue in between rounds. That's all I kind of had in my head. So I was percolating on an idea. I called him up and I got a little bit more specifics of like, what did you think? What did you want me to do in regards to this? And he said, specifically like a sequel to this particular story. So gave me, a couple of days. I sort of thought about it and then came up with the angle and pitched it in the car before a uni class. That was pretty much.
Yeah, wow.
Yeah, wow. Yeah, I was just wondering if we can maybe take a little bit back.
Sure.
So I guess you not only you don't just do the Phantom, of course. You've got a few other projects. Before we get solely focused on the Phantom, which we are a Phantom podcast, of course, I was just wondering if you can tell us a little bit about some of the other projects you've been working on in the last couple of years. Flock, I believe there's another. I can't remember the name of it at the top of my head, but there was another one which I think comes out, or the Kickstarter, or comes out next week, which was one various artists.
Yeah, sure. I guess once the pandemic hit, it was sort of like pencils down. I basically wrapped up. I think I was working on Kid Phantom 9 at the time and was sort of told that would be the last one. So I finished that. And then got thrown another one while I was working on The Deep, doing concept art. So I was very busy and stressed throughout that part of that pandemic after a mourning period of, all the phantom work kind of drying up. So I after I wrapped my head around that, I had this burning desire to do my own work, put some of my own energy into something that's sort of solely mine. And that's where kind of Flock came from. So it was originally off I guess I take my my third year art direction students to the museum to do some sketching, and we combine it with life drawing, and we combine it too with like animal sketches and things like that. So I used to do these little mashup demos, sort of an example of photo bashing in class for concept art. And I'd created this particular character that I decided I wanted to write a story about. So, and part of it too was I'd gathered all this material for the Vietnam War series, only to sort of have it dry up. So I'm like, well, I've got all this stuff that I've researched, and I want to kind of put it to use. So that's where sort of Flock germinated from that. This old soldier telling us his sort of 50-year story from the front lines of World War I all the way through to what will eventually be Vietnam, but it crosses paths with things like the Emu War and stuff like that. So that was kickstarted at the start of the year.
Can I jump in and ask one question or a couple of questions about Flock, Paul?
Sure. Sorry, I know my brain just takes
the.
So
No, that's all right. I just want to want to say the idea of so for people who haven't seen Flock, the concept basically is a giant pigeon man-sized pigeon who fights in World War I and then gets old with his hands. And what I love about that is, like, it's a ridiculous concept,
yeah.
And you would address that in the book. You go, oh, where did he come from? Oh, I didn't ask. just the blind acceptance. Go, oh, well,
He's just there.
Yeah. Well, I guess
love that. I really enjoyed that element.
Thank you. I guess if we're talking spoilers, yes.
I haven't read it yet, so just spoil ahead.
Sorry, Jermayn was very kind to get one of the. Well, you were all very kind in supporting it, and through my own hubris, I guess I've got a lot. I'm down to my last 8 parcels to send off because they're all the commission levels, and Jermayn's got quite a few commissions to get through. So he hasn't quite seen the book yet. And when I did the campaign, I didn't advertise at all what the book actually was about, which was essentially a 6-foot man pigeon that runs around the battlefields delivering messages for the Allied forces. So it's dumb, yes, but I wanted to treat it deadly serious.
Yeah.
Which hopefully that's the joke. And yeah, I figured I had a lot of trouble trying to figure out logically where that thing developed. So I've got an idea, and I've written, although the whole story is written, it's just a matter of me drawing it. And I thought, well, this guy's not really going to know because he was a young kid who grew up to be a soldier, and his expertise was just he grew up with birds, so he's not going to understand it even if someone explains it to him. So yeah, that was, and I wrote, and that was, it's funny that you say that, Dan, because I had Duncan here giving me a hand with the logistics of the mail out, and he said that was his bit, that favourite bit that made him laugh too. revelation.
Oh, there you go.
Didn't you ask where it came from? He went, no. So
I suppose it saves you having to explain that if you just do it like that, you don't have to explain it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm treating it a little bit like Cloverfield in a way, in a sense of, if you ever seen Cloverfield, it's all found footage of like an attack of a creature or kaiju attacking a city. And it's never brought up in the film where the thing came from, except for a little bit right at the very end, if you're paying attention. And so I'm kind of treating this in a similar fashion, you know, because I don't just want to exposition dump. I mean, the whole hanging aspect of the story is an old man in a pub in the late 60s telling his story to a bartender that looks suspiciously like Paul Hogan. So, you know, so it's that's the conceit. But in doing that, I wanted to tell this really long story in a very short space of time, and that was the best way to kind of do it. But it'll eventually catch up in the present if I can give anything away.
Yeah, right.
It'll all make sense in the end. So it's a long. Well, there's 4 issues.
Well,
we'll see how we go.
Right. Well, I certainly enjoyed it. I'm looking forward to chapter 2.
Oh, that's nice to hear, because I was really worried about what the average fandom fan would think reading it, because it is a little bit different than fandom or
Oh, if we can accept the little people on Eden, and the cave monsters, I think we can
some
find
of
a
us
place.
are still in denial about that, some of those traits.
It reminds me of some of the comments. Oh, well, I only got 2 comments that were negative about the Masked Marvel story, and it reminds me of that when someone says you ruin the fandom legacy. I'm like pretty sure every fandom creator, including Lee Falk, has ruined the legacy in one way or another. There's always something that people aren't going to like about the books, you know.
I think I saw something today. I didn't read the whole thing, but someone was having a bit of a comment about what Tony DePaul's done in the Daily lately.
Yeah. I actually thought it was like, I think like you guys, you know, you see it and you go, you realize the ramification of seeing it. That's what makes it cool. And at the same time, it's a fictional story, so I'm not going to like lose my nana over it. So
we'll probably have more of a discussion about that with Tony. I'm really looking forward to having a podcast with Tony about that story. There is an article on the website which has some of his thoughts about some of that as well. So I have a bit of a read.
And that was good. It was what I kind of thought and what you guys kind of thought, I guess. That was, you know. Yeah,
but we're not talking about Tony DePaul. No offense, Tony. Paul, we're here to talk about you.
Anything to avoid talking about myself. Yeah.
We're here to talk about
those Rabbitohs
story here. So why the Masked Marvel? What makes it so special for you?
I don't know. I like the you know, when I was a kid, and it didn't matter what the story was, like there were certain eras of writers and artists that you would read a story about, like if it was Spider-Man for me, or even Phantom. Sometimes it put you in a place that just made everything kind of feel comfortable. I don't know, you know, that's kind of a stupid sort of answer there, but you know, like I like the Wilson McCoy stories. There's an innocence to them. There's an innocence to that world, even though you have roughnecks running around and that sort of thing. And you know, I guess it just had all those classic kind of phantom tropes in there. The Mr. Walker in the coat, going to the nondescript bar with the double doors, meeting the roughneck looking thug, you know, in the Wilson McCoy drawn fashion.
I love the perfect stripes of the trench coat.
Yeah, I can imagine if it was animated, it would be like that classic trick that they would use. You'd see it in Ren and Stimpy, where you would just have a flat tartan type background and the character would move in front of it, just to kind of cut down on the animating those lines. I think that would be good. But there's just something about those aspects that are familiar to a McCoy story. But then it's like, yes, he comes up against gangsters, but it was a boxing story, and it was I grew up with the Rocky films, so I remember my father, my grandfather, my dad's dad, he would record videotapes. I would too, but he would record them from television, and we're going through his collection one day. He didn't live far from us on the Central Coast, and we come across Rocky, and it had Rocky 3 on the same tape. I don't think it was written on the label. It just had Rocky, right? So I go home and my dad shows me Rocky, and I would have been in like high school. And I'd been doing martial arts for a few years at that time, but I'd never seen Rocky before. And I loved it. Rocky, it's not your typical action movie. It's a romance. It just has the trappings of boxing in there, which is a little bit like this story as well. And then I remember the video stopping and it had Rocky 3 immediately afterwards. And we're like, oh, we got to go get Rocky 2. So we ran out to the video store, got Rocky 2, come back, we watched Rocky 2. We popped Pop's tape back in for Rocky 3. And right at the final fight against Clubber Lang, the tape stops. We're like, oh, crap. So we run back to the video store. We get Rocky 3. We get Rocky 3. We go back. We put on Rocky 3. Watched the end. Loved it. And then I don't know why.
Or did you watch the whole thing again?
No, we watched the whole thing again. I don't know why we didn't pick 4 and 5 at the time while we were there. But I remember going back to get Rocky 4, Rocky 5. We found 5. Of course, you can find 5, and there's obvious reasons why.
What is there a Rocky 5?
Yeah, we don't like to talk about that.
What's wrong with Tommy Gunn?
Anyway,
Rocky in the street.
but we couldn't find Rocky 4, and I was getting upset that why isn't there Rocky 4 in here? Who would have hired out Rocky 4? With my dad pointing out that we're looking for Rocky 4. So, but yeah, I loved those films. Just that nice guy underdog. I mean, the Phantom's not necessarily an underdog. The charm of the story comes down to the fact that no one has encountered the Phantom before and they don't know who he is. So he's just underestimated everywhere he goes. And I like that. It's kind of fun, that aspect of it. It reminds me of like Rambo a little bit, where Rambo's always underestimated in a situation and then, shows his true colours. Or even Rocky sometimes, even though he becomes a favourite.
He was always the underdog, though.
He always ends up being the underdog in some way, shape or form, whether it's the opponent or the circumstances surrounding him, whether it's a physical thing. The Phantom doesn't necessarily have that physical aspect. So in the sequel, you kind of have to, manufacture those elements to it, which to be fair, Lee Falk had in the story. Like he comes up against, he might have been knocking out guys with one punch, but up till that point where he comes up against Kid Hercules, who is an actual legitimate world champion, it's a struggle for him. Or even just being under the lights was a struggle for him earlier when he was fighting Kid Boff. So, not Kid Boff, Tiger Toma. So there's just I think that's what appealed to me in terms of the story. It has kind of everything. He's fighting for a good cause. There's misunderstandings with Diana that could have been explained if he just tried a little harder to explain himself, but he kind of cracks the shits and goes, and then there was a fun little bit at the end with Diana showing up in the jungle. It's just so implausible, but it reminds me of that classic kind of Hollywood movie where he walks in the cave and she's like, well, what took you so long? It's kind of fun. So there's I think that's it's just charming little story. It's not that it's 100% believable, but there is a certain level of believability to it in comparison to some of those other stories at the time.
Yeah. So you're a fan of boxing and all that.
Mm-hmm.
We know it's fiction, but in reading this story and reading some of the characters that the phantom fought, is there any like real life boxers that you can kind of see that maybe Lee Falk or Wilson McCoy kind of modelled on?
It's kind of tricky. I mean, if you look back at some of those classic fighters of the 40s and 50s, like this is 1948, 49 when it came out, and you know, the first thing that when coming out with the sequel, I always try to put the story in the context of the time.
Yep.
And, you know, like with Kid Phantom I did, and with the Phantom in Vietnam I did too. With this story, however, you know, Kid Hercules is the world champion heavyweight, right? But at the time, Joe Louis was coming to the tail end of his 10 to 11 year reign as the heavyweight champion. So the people depicted in the story and as the heavyweight champion itself in comparison to real life didn't correlate, which was kind of funny because if I wondered, I'd be curious to ask, you know, if we could ask Lee Falk why he chose not to have an African-American heavyweight champion in the same or similar vein as a Joe Louis. Because it's not like Kid Hercules was a villain. He was a legitimate champion gentleman, reminding me of, like, I don't know, a Cinderella man like Braddock. Or
I just recently watched that movie. It was enjoyable again.
It's a good movie. Yeah, it's a good movie. It's fictionalized a little bit. Max Baer was not a nasty guy. He was a really nice guy. In fact, his son became Jethro in the original Beverly Hillbillies. That's Max Baer Jr., which is a dumb trivia quote that you can use somewhere.
But I remember reading an article from the family of that, and they were a little bit, I remember them saying they were a little bit unhappy about the way that their grandfather or whatever was portrayed in that movie.
Yeah. I can understand that because he wasn't a villain. But it's Hollywood and you've got to take creative license. So a long answer to you, to what should have been a short answer. I didn't really recognize the boxers per se, particularly because Joe Louis, he had that heavyweight crown for a very long time until he came up against Rocky Marciano in 1950, and that was his defeat, the first time in decade. He, at some point, his fights became known as the Bum of the Month Club because he was just fighting, you know, there was no real big fights. Like when you think about who Joe Louis fought back in his era, that were sort of particularly big fights. Marciano always comes to mind, and that's the fact that he lost it. And his big fights were against Max Schmeling, particularly the one in World War II, which was the rematch. He may have had some other bigger ones, but I mean, as a sort of a casual boxing fan that's more in tune with the Ali era, I can't think of them off the top of my head. It's the people surrounding the characters in the Masked Marvel that reminded me of people around that time. You know, like, and I allude to it in the story, as well as the article at the end that kind of clarifies it. So I always thought that Joe, the original manager, trainer of the original Masked Marvel, looked a lot like Cus D'Amato, who was around at about at that era. Cuss is more famous for being Mike Tyson's trainer, who passed away, and unfortunately probably didn't help Tyson's mental capacities and emotional capabilities afterwards when he died. And Cuss came up against people in the mob as well. I mean, boxing was inherently tied in with the mob at the time, particularly if you fought at Madison Square Garden. It was the IBC, I think, off the top of my head, that guys like Frankie Carbo, who was called the Tsar of boxing, he controlled the sport in that sense. A lot of fighters in his pocket. He kind of looked a little bit like Pete in the original story, so that's why I don't necessarily call him Carbo in the comic, because there's another character called Frank in the comic. So I call him Vitali because the St. Louis crime family was last name Vitali, and he had a stake in a lot of fighters. In particular, he had a invested interest and financial stake in Sonny Liston, who was like one of the last boxers of the era that was tied up with the mob at the time, which I remember Glenn saying at one point we should put a Liston-like character in the book, but I thought that perhaps the first African-American boxer that the Phantom comes up against shouldn't necessarily be African-American in that regard. I'd rather do something a little different, and that's partly why I sort of came up with a different opponent, which I'll get to later if you're interested.
Sorry, what were you going to say, Dan?
If anyone had tuned into this podcast thinking, gee, I wonder if Paul can explain how he was able to represent the boxing world of that era authentically. I think any of those questions have just been put to bed. Goodness me, it's an encyclopedic knowledge. Obviously you...
No, sorry to interrupt.
No, my internet's a bit unstable. Sorry, but I was just obviously you have in your story drawn paid some homage to a famous boxing promoter of the 1980s. It's fair to say that Don King gets a bit of a tip of the hat. What about Primo Golota? Is he actually based on any of your boxes?
Yeah. So I think one of the things I was saying earlier was when I was trying to identify an era, I couldn't, and Lee Falk stories are a little bit like that anyway. You can't necessarily identify it as a particular year or a particular era per se. So I kind of treated it as such. It's a little like Jim Shepard's stories. You couldn't necessarily put it in a particular era, or even the Batman animated series that, there's some future elements in it. There's some classic Art Deco in it, so it kind of feels old-timey, but then it feels modern at the same time. So I kind of treated the sequel the same. Even though it's kind of set with elements referencing characters of the past, I wanted to touch on some of those other characters that are tied in with the boxing world. So, yes, the Ron Caesar character is definitely a Don King nod, tip of the hat. In fact, he was kind of planted there. That was one of the first scenes I kind of came up with because I thought it would be humorous to sort of figure out what the Phantom would do if he was encountered such a person. I should have sent you the actual digital files, Jermayn, because that was one of the things of the comics that I sort of thought, well, the print quality and the paper quality is it's an improvement, but my colouring was probably made from more of a digital or a glossy page approach. So, it's unfortunate, but that's okay. So we're talking about page 40 and 41 here, which if you're on the screen, if you're on YouTube, you can see
Joe Lewis on there. These are the ones you're talking about there, correct?
Oh, yeah. So you got Don King there. Actually, on the top left page, if you look at the guys in the background as window dressing, there's always guys hanging around in these weigh-ins and press conferences. From left to right, you've got Muhammad Ali. You're zooming in there. Yeah, hang on, let me find it on my one so I don't stall for you. Yeah, Muhammad Ali. You got Teddy Atlas next to him with the ESPN, not ESPN. Obviously, nondescript guy behind there. But then you've got Joe Frazier. Half the head there is a bit of an Oscar De La Hoya. And then, whoops, gone off my screen. What did I press? Anyway. And then next to him, the big guy in the back with the moustache, that's classic Joe Frazier in his first boxing stint, because he had 2 careers in boxing. Came back in the 80s and early 90s with the shaved head and the more friendlier Joe Frazier, George Foreman that we all know. And then the guy sitting at the end there that's cropped off the panel, that's Rocky Marciano.
Oh, wow.
So I just tried to litter a few of those characters.
So you can get George Foreman and his grilling on the shot?
It is George there, just no grill.
Just George, no grill. This is pre-grill George Foreman.
I like it how you got him on the other side to Muhammad Ali, just in case of rumble. With,
yeah. But I do have Ali very curious on the next page looking at the Phantoms weigh-in. He's tucked in behind the Phantom.
That's what I was actually wondering. Yeah. What have you got him as?
That's a good question. In the original book, he was
198 in the
98 pounds, which is fairly light for a heavyweight. I think these days it would be more considered a cruiserweight or a light heavyweight. If I was going to call him, I would have said he was around the 220, 220 pound. Ali was 6'3". He fought around the 2 teens area up to the 218s, I think, later in his career, as you get naturally denser. So that would be more of a natural weight at that time. I think 198 is on the very lighter side. I don't even think Floyd Patterson. I think Floyd Patterson, who looked fairly thin back in the day, was a 210. So I don't know.
Because when I read his weight in the original Marx Marvel, I thought 109. That to me that seemed light.
Yeah,
what's 198 in kgs?
Yeah, hang on. I'd have to do the math there. I'm thinking it's like
about 90.
High 80s, early 90s. It could be right on bang on 90. I don't know.
Yeah, that's quite light. You would think he would be. Like if you think about some of the footballers and stuff like that are 6'2", 6'3", they're 95.
Having said that, though, like, again, I know boxers of the sort of the 60s and 70s, had better diets, better training regimes as they developed in time. I was watching football game from the 1980s on my birthday the other day because my parents were around, and a mate of ours was playing in an Old South game. And we were surprised at how small and smaller the football players looked in comparison to today's standards, where everyone's quite large. So, I think the weights would have adjusted over time. I'm not privy to that per se, but I do know you had, guys like Jack Johnson, back in the era, turn of the century, when boxing was still unlimited rounds and almost bare knuckle in some cases. He was quite a tall man and fairly large in that regard, which gets to that other point of who else is in the book, that Primo Golota. He's an amalgamation between 2 large 6'7" guys who fought. One guy fought back in the Joe Lewis days, Primo Canera, who I referenced at one point. The fan remembers Canera because I thought it was funny that Phantoms fought giants before in other stories, so this is just another giant that he happens to fight.
Yeah.
So Primo fought in the 30s. He was a very, very large guy. I think he had the heavyweight championship for maybe less than a year. And then Golota was a boxer in the sort of the late period Tyson era. We're talking 90s. And he was a big guy as well, but he was a very dirty fighter. So I actually had one reader who, when Frew shared the poster of the fight, and you see Primo Golota's name on the poster, someone made a comment of Phantom better watch out for the low blows, and so he knew exactly where I was coming from with that. And in fact, in the story, he's a dirty fighter as well. Golota.
Where was that scene?
I want to say Riddick Bowe, maybe he fought Riddick Bowe, and there was a lot of low blows in that fight, to the point where Golota was winning on the cards and then disqualified himself because he just kept landing low shots. He was,
There it is, bang.
Yeah, so he talks about, I fought giants before, low blow, headbutt.
Yeah, that's it.
So is there any other like fighters or Easter eggs or anything that you wanted to kind of highlight? Yeah, while we've got the story up here for the YouTube, and we'll talk about page numbers for those.
Sure. Well, this on I guess from page 28. The opening of the story from page 27, 28, 29. The conceit was, I wasn't sure if the story was being printed with anything else when I first wrote and drew it. So I wanted to give a nice little recap of the first story.
I really
just
like
the bits
that.
that were important. So I did it in the form of the old ESPN Ringside Classic docos that you can still watch on KO, and there's some on YouTube as well. Where it's held in Gleason's gym, but it's spelt differently, Gleason, and I just used anagrams of the real guys. So like Brian Kenny was the guy who used to host that show. I just named him Ryan Benny in this, and his co-host, who was a famous boxing historian, which you can see there with a cigar. And the little Mighty Mix Jim poster from Rocky behind him. His name was Bert Sugar, Bert Randolph Sugar. So I changed his name to Ernie, Bert and Ernie, and then Sweet. Sweet is his last name instead of Sugar. So just a nod to those guys, because they used to host all those like 25 classic knockouts or ESPN classics about Sugar Ray Robertson or Muhammad Ali or Marciano or Joe Louis, so they used to host those series. And the 10 top 10 heavyweights of all time was a good one, as well as the 25 knockouts, greatest knockouts of all time is a good one as well, because they get other boxers in to have opinions, and some of the former opponents still have a bit of resentment towards one another. I recall Tommy Hearns, Tom the Hitman Hearns fought Sugar Ray Leonard, which is referenced on one of the covers, and he and Sugar Ray get into it on the doco because Tommy thought that he won, which, to be fair, he did, but the judges thought differently. So I've got Tiger Toma on the show as a former opponent, commenting, because that's what they do. On the early one, they bring in like George Chuvalo, the Canadian heavyweight that fought him, and Joe Frazier, and George Foreman. They bring those guys in, and they usually have a little bit of venom. Larry Holmes, in particular, was very up himself, so he'd always have something to throw there. He was ranked number 10 on the top 10 boxers of all time, heavyweights, and he thought he should have been 1. So, so there's a little nod to kind of that in that lead up to the story.
So it's
but they don't know behind the scenes stuff, so it's a good way to kind of roll into the chronicles and the fandoms.
I thought it was really good, and as you said there before, you didn't know if it was actually going to be behind the Masked Marvel original. I think it's read really well, even though you haven't planned it necessarily to read as of the next page sort of thing, because it did exactly what you said about highlighting the parts of the original that were important for your plot going forward. So where did you the plot that you've created for the sequel is very much harks back to so many of the original elements, all of the same characters, lots of sequels, and we've seen it with, dare I say, Rocky V. Like, it's just got your main character moved on. You could have done a sequel that was just the Phantom as a boxer again, but instead you've brought forward all of Falk's other characters. Can you talk us a bit through that process?
Yeah. I thank you for the question. I when I read the story, I identified 2 things that bugged me about the original that were just left threads. One was the fact that the original Masked Marvel, gets beat up, put in hospital, and is never seen again. And I kind of wondered what his opinion would have been of seeing someone take his name and legacy, even though he was a prick. I just wanted to visit what he was feeling after, like, losing his identity and then someone going on and being successful with it. The other thing that I thought was strange was there was a mob boss, Pete. I don't know, did they give his offsider a name? I think I just called him Blinky because I was nodding to Blinky Palermo, the other organised crime figure in boxing at the time. They might have even referenced him as Blinky in the story, and it was just convenient. I can't remember. But they're sitting there at the fight. They've told him to take a dive. Phantom doesn't listen to anybody and just knocks the guy out in one punch. And they go, should we kill him? And he says, well, no, we can't now. He's a national hero. Like, the limelight's on him now. And then you never see them again either. So those were the 2 main holes I wanted to fill. What happened to the original Masked Marvel, and what happened to, Pete, and the fact that he knows where Joe is. Like, he sent a guy around to convince Joe to throw the fight. So I didn't think the mob would just take it lightly. And that was pretty much the conceit of the plot. But really it was like plot mechanics and structure, like, are one thing, but anyone can do that. Anyone can kind of figure out a plot, and you see it in a lot of stories. But I just wanted to get to the heart of what does a fighter think and go through when they go through that, trial and tribulation of, entering the ring and trying to face someone else that just wants to hurt you. And
it's a real thinking type of story. I didn't think I would be reading the Phantom's emotions as much or going through it. It's a real, there's like that real drama element, and it's more than just a fight. There's so much more about it. It's you definitely put it's not what I expected when I was going to read it. I thought, oh, here we go, some boxing, and there's a lot more to it.
I guess it was a chance to kind of inject all the things that, I've still got a lot of unresolved feelings surrounding my time competing, and you try to intellectualize a lot of stuff, and it can be hard, and I see a lot of stuff, and I'm inspired by people like, Teddy Atlas or, Ali or Bruce Lee that are thinkers when it comes to this sort of stuff. And I just wanted to inject a bit of that into the story, because if you don't have any kind of conflict or struggle for the main character, then it's just boring, and it just becomes an end then sort of story. So instead, I wanted there to be ramifications of things that happen. So this happens, but therefore this happens, and then he has to therefore do this in order to overcome it. So but away from that, I wanted it to kind of connect in a number of different ways. So I wanted the Masked Marvel to have a little bit of redemption in that regard. There's a nod to an old Rod Serling, one of the guy that created the Twilight Zone. One of his first projects that he got up and running was a play, and then it was made into a telemovie, and it was called Requiem for a Heavyweight. So I was trying to resolve that aspect of the story, as well as, Until the Final Bell being the main title of the story, was a line that Joe said in the original book, where they were counting out the Phantom against Kid Hercules, and he said, "No, not until the final bell." So it's a little bit like life in that way. You might have these things that you try to do and fail, and you get knocked down, and it doesn't necessarily go your way, but it's not over until that bell rings. So, like the events outside of the ring and like the events in the ring, I was just trying to tie all that aspect together and hopefully tell a story that had a little bit of maybe meaning behind it, or if someone can get more out of it than just the events that take place in it. So,
I noticed the little son here has a little Souths jumper on.
Yeah, I couldn't resist.
Is that like I was talking to Paul Bartlett, who's a fan and also a South supporter, and he says there's a joke about the guy in the random Souths jumper or something like that.
Oh yeah, there's every sporting event in the world, there's always one guy in a random Souths jersey. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's like that's the random Souths guy. He's told me that story a few times, and I remember that story. And then when I see this, there's the random Souths guy.
Yeah, true. But my grandfather played for the Souths in the 50s, my father was born and bred in Redfern, so I always have that South Sydney connection there.
So is that the same grandfather who got you hooked on Rocky?
Yes, yeah, same guy.
So that's on page 49 that we're talking about.
Yeah. Actually, it's funny, South does have a bit of a boxing connection. One of the fight posters on the back of that cover, I don't think it was cropped out. Oh, a little bit of his name's cropped out. But you've got the original poster behind you. The Rocky Marciano versus Jersey Joe Walcott poster. Rocky Marciano, when he visited Australia, went and hung out with South Sydney, and there's a photo that my dad has. It's got a mate of ours in it who played in the 60s for the Rabbitohs, Richie Powell. But Rocky Marciano is wearing a South jersey in the photograph. And the joke was, when it was in the newspapers in Sydney, was South have a new hooker. So, yeah, that was
yeah. Sorry, got a cough. Any other questions that you've got about the story that I might just take?
You just touched on it then, Paul, about your little subtitle there about Requiem for a Masked Heavyweight, and how it came from an episode. When you're talking about a Requiem for a Masked Heavyweight, are you talking about the original Masked Marvel?
Yeah. So he, as you say in the story, like, I have this picture, like when you write stories, and this is something that I've had to particularly learn writing these short ones for the NAM series. You want to try to get in as late as possible and leave early as possible. So you keep it economical as you can. So I imagine that there's different scenes that can get you to certain points in this story, but you don't necessarily have to tell them. Like, for instance, the Phantom getting from the jungles to then Bartana to visit the gym where he trains. Like, you don't need to see him ride the horse and give the horse to like Toma and do all that and get on the plane and stuff like that. I envisioned like Joe or maybe even the mob coming to the original Masked Marvel, who I had to give a name. I couldn't call him Masked Marvel, so I just called him Marvin Morales. Due to the region that he would have come from, I pictured him a little bit like a Canelo Alvarez type ethnicity. And I can imagine him having to perform as this Masked Marvel fighting against this fight that he's supposed to not only lose, but he has to lose in the last round. So he's got to be reasonably fit to do it before he takes the dive. And him just not handling it, there's a lot of triggers there. So we just find him in a bit of a stupor. But by the end of it, hoping that there's some sort of redemption for him at the end, and that was, doing something for the local community.
Yeah, I certainly thought that redemption, and I had to look him up and find out that his name was Marvin. But I thought the redemption of Marvin was a great way to close the story. And it was a real example. I thought that was the moment for me that he became a three-dimensional character. Like, he'd been a very two-dimensional character in the original, and it's not dissimilar. I assume you will have seen this, Paul, Cobra Kai and the redemption of Johnny Lawrence. I think there's
That's a good point. I now that you say that makes sense. I liked the first season of Cobra Kai in particular. Kind of, for me, it felt like the wheels got a bit wobbly for me in later seasons, but and I could probably just watch an entire season of a show called Crease from boot camp all the way through his NAM era. That would be amazing. But no, yes, now that you point out the correlation, that makes perfect sense. Yeah.
I've literally just finished the season 4 of Cobra Kai with Gus. We've been watching it pretty much nonstop the last month and a half, so it's very front of mind as I read this one.
Yeah, no, that's great. Yeah, without the, I guess, there's a similar trajectory. Let's say he's not the same kind of character, but certainly has that redemptive quality, and then being of a particular age, it was no longer about the fighting in the ring to prove his worth, but doing something for others that, I kind of imagine that the Phantom talking to him, encouraged him to get cleaned up and show up at the match and interject at the right time, really saving the Phantom's life, if you think about it, because those gangsters wouldn't have hesitated to fire a few shots off. They would have, like gangsters back in the day. Carbo, I think, had killed like at least 5 people, but they could just never get charges to stick because they owned judges and they owned lawyers. They could just make charges disappear. So it's, things had to really change and evolve with those mid-50s hearings. Jack LaMotta speaking at one of those hearings saying, I took a dive because I was promised to fight the heavyweight for the middleweight championship, which made him a bit of an outlier, but I never liked LaMotta anyway. If you've seen Raging Bull, you know the story. So,
So are you happy with the way of the story and the comic and, everything's kind of has...
Maybe just not the print quality, perhaps?
Yeah.
Oh, look, don't take that as the wrong way. Like, I'm just a perfectionist. So
Yeah, we know.
I'm very proud of this issue, and I think, and I'm very humbled and honoured that Frew gave the material this treatment. Full color with the color story of that Ivan Pedersen coloured. The being able to do the front cover, because I was originally told it was going to be Felmang, actually, I think was going to be offered the cover back in 2019, I believe. So it was really nice that they chose that, which was actually just a donation that to the memorial dinner as the cover that
I think we've got the original donation somewhere. Oh,
Yeah.
there it is.
So there's the let me just pin it so I have some limelight. So there's the original there. So could you just while we're talking about it, and for the record, it's sold for $20. So that way, if my wife ever she knows how much I paid
Better
for
say
it.
the kids at Westmead are very grateful for your donation, Paul and Jermayn.
But that's the original there, and then there's the cover there. Could you just tell us a little bit about the cover and?
Yeah, sure. I think it's based on a Dempsey pose, Jack Dempsey, a heavyweight champ, but a very similar pose that you often see, like back in the day. That Marciano, I'm pretty sure I've seen in similar positions. That classic boxer pose. I sketched that for fun a number of years ago. I did too, actually, and I think from memory, Glenn owns the other one.
Is that with Gurin in the background,
yes.
and he's kind of hunched over? That
Yes.
was another donation at the dinner, and I remember getting into a little bit of a bidding war with Glenn over that, because Mars Marvel is one of my favourite stories. That one and the heavyweight champion story. You grew up on Rocky. It was like the only R movie I was ever allowed to watch. But love the movie. Yo, Adrian, just thought it was brilliant. Love those stories. And then when I saw that, I thought, oh, that's amazing. And so that's when this came up, I thought, it's mine. And I'm paying, I'm paying for it. But it's
They're very happy to give $20 for that one.
Yeah, that's it. $20 well spent.
That's very kind. I'm glad that you liked it and it touched on something that you really enjoy. I was very happy that even like when Dudley saw it and said, whoever wins this, send me a scan. And I said to him, well, actually, I scanned it before I donated it. So he said, that's the cover. So I sent it to him and he said, can you do it in color? And because it wasn't originally intended to be color, I ended up doing the more painterly route in short notice and knock something up. But I'm very touched that they, not only did the cover, the story, the article in the back, and then put some sort of wanky pictures up that put in there, but the poster and the sketch cover, that's just icing on the cake. I'm very thrilled with the kindness, I guess. I know it's a job, and there's a lot of people that they could have had to do this sort of stuff. So I kind of appreciate, and it's one of those things where, it's the flavor of the week, and then the next thing that comes out is the newer thing, and it's sort of moved on and forgotten. But I really appreciate all the little things about it, like even the name on the front cover is very nice. That's not something that you often see on a fandom comic, so it's very, very kind.
I think it was only the 1990s that they started actually putting creators in the credits on the story and as well.
Right.
So
Yeah, you're right when you say. I hadn't thought about that, Paul, but you're right. Very rarely does the author get or the creator get a title credit. Do you? Front page cover credit like that. When you say it's going to be the flavour of the month, but as a sketch cover, it's going to float around for a good while to come. Are you going to stock yourself up on a box and think of all the different boxing poses that you can? You'll be able to sketch on this forever.
I was very pleased with that, and I think Duncan and I were talking about it, and he may have. I didn't quite know where he was going with the conversation, so it's nice to kind of it all sort of click into place, understanding what was happening. But no, Frew very kindly sent me a number of comps, so I've got quite a few, which I haven't. It's on my to-do list down the track.
Cool.
I haven't got that far ahead, but I did have a couple of people already out and say I would like one, and I'm like, whoa, slow down. I will get you. I just finished. I did 4 sketch covers for Flock, and I've still got maybe half a dozen Flock sketch covers in existence for cons, and then to have those is quite nice. And I'm still catching up on some of the bigger A3 commissions for Flock. So when I knock those over, I'll circle back to those Mass Marvels. It's very kind, and I guess it's smart for Frew to have a pack that that people they might get a sketch cover as a gift or something, and then have that material that might entice them to buy more Phantoms. I don't know. As I said, I'm very touched.
You would think
if I only ever have a handful of people that penetrate the bubble and reach out and say, you do good work. I'm glad that Dudley and Glenn are 2 of those people that's like my work.
Yeah. You must be because there will be other artists now that that's the sketch cover for Frew for history would say probably next 12 months or so that'll be the one that rolls around. There'll be lots of other artists drawing on it. You'd imagine that lots of people who are getting those commissions done will ask for a boxing pose because it's natural for the story. You must be looking forward to seeing what other people do with that as well.
I don't really hear too much from anybody else in Frew apart from Andrew and Duncan. I bump into people at the dinners and say hello. I'll probably come across them if they post them online. I'm friends with a few people. I just I don't know. I get caught up in my own work and people get caught up in their work. I think artists are perhaps shy by very nature, or maybe it's just, I don't know. There's always that friendly competition that happens amongst certain artists of getting stories and credits and comics and covers, and it's to be frank, it's a lot of bullshit I don't want to deal with. So I just deal with whatever I'm doing. So I hope that people don't maybe take it the wrong way or feel resentful that here's a sketch cover of their work and then there's another Aussie name on it or anything like that. I'm looking forward to seeing what happens. I've seen a few come up and there's nothing related to boxing at all, and I think that's the beauty part of a sketch cover with Phantom. You can do whatever you like and have your own interpretation, whatever. I'll be curious to see if anyone gets any more sort of boxing stuff, and I would guess that maybe there'll be a lot of the famous Muhammad Ali standing over Sonny Liston
the Phantom Punch
pose, which very, very the Phantom Punch, ironically in the name, which is kind of funny. Everyone sees it as him sort of towering over, but it was a split second in time. He was actually telling Sonny Liston to get up because he suspected that Sonny had thrown the fight, which to this day is not 100% confirmed, but it's probably tried to stay down and Muhammad Ali didn't follow script. So, it's an interesting, iconic pose that gets a lot of grandeur attached to it in what was a sort of a very shady moment in sport. So, but I imagine I'll see a few of those, or just the pose.
There'll be a natural pose.
Absolutely.
Yeah, very natural.
Even without this, the sketch cover though, I reckon. I know you're saying this is like the favour of the week or the fortnight, but don't sell yourself short. Like, this is going to be one of those issues that, in a year or two you're going through. Oh, what am I going to read? This will be an issue that I'll take out again and read again. Like, not every, like, I like just about every issue that comes out, but I'm not going to go back and read them all. This one I'm going back and I'll be reading it, again and again.
Thanks, Stephen. I appreciate that. Look, I hope it resonates. That's we always. Well, that's a lie. I was going to say we always do stories that we hope resonates. Sometimes it's healthier just to create and do a story for the sake of the creation and find satisfaction in the work yourself. And if other people like it, it's a bonus, which is a little bit selfish, but you have to fortify yourself emotionally when you're dealing with dyed-in-the-wool phantom readers who might not necessarily like your take, So, healthy adult thinking. That's what I'm always aiming for. That level of contentness in my work. It's not always there, but as I said to an audience at a writers' festival recently, that what drives me is often a sense of maybe spite, or maybe a little bit of that Mass Marvel aspect in the story of, well, okay, I might not have gotten it right this time, but I'll get the next time right, and then you try again.
So I just want to draw everyone's attention to the back cover of Frew 1925, which is kind of like the Phantom getting ready, taping up his knuckles and his hands and stuff like that. There's a couple of little Easter eggs.
Only a couple?
Hang on, stop talking because it disappears for those who are on YouTube. Let me just pin that one. So you've got Ford versus White, which is the Frew boxing fight night. So who won that fight? Because I did hear a story that Rene did give out some pointers of health and fitness and fighting stuff like that. So is he a bit of a dark horse with that one?
Less said the better. No, I think that's a hard one. Glenn's probably got the height, weight, and reach advantage there, but you never discount the underdog. So,
and where's Dudley? Where's Dudley during this fight? Is he?
I reckon
he
Dudley
getting himself a nice office with the two of them bashing each other up, and he can
I reckon
himself an
Dudley's
office.
at the VIP table. Yeah, Dudley's at the VIP table with a nice bottle of red, enjoying the festivities, I would imagine.
With you can't really see it in the comic, but a nice Australian flavour is you got Costa.
Costa Zoo.
Yep. So there's
Zab Judah. I remember being at the club with Dad watching that fight unfold, and the place erupted when Zab Judah hit the canvas in the third round. A lot of those fights there, if they're not made up fights or just nods to friends, are fights that had some sort of resonance or impact on me, or just famous fights. Not I couldn't fit them all in, but there was a few there of boxers and fights that I appreciated in one way or another. The other Aussie nod is Justin the Iceman Frost. He's a local fighter who has the Australian title at the moment, I believe. So
nice. Now we do need to talk about East Promotions.
Yes.
Now I heard that he's a little bit dodgy, and he hasn't actually yet paid the fighters.
Paid the card.
No.
Is he the Bob Arum of the Chronicle Chamber group, is he?
Hang on. I'll go and find something. Now, What's he saying? I refute all accusations, innuendos, and insinuations.
Thank you, Ron Caesar.
Of course, we're talking about just the back here where you've got East Promotions, Fraser versus Parker, Moore versus McCoy, Falk versus Barry. So Falk versus Barry would have been an interesting one.
I think if you got them both on their day, they would go at it.
Just for a random Sunday arvo in Central Park and watch me go.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then you've got Moore versus McCoy. McCoy was actually older than Ray Moore, which I don't think most people actually realised. I think most people actually thought that McCoy would be the younger of the two, but he was actually older. So, and then of course you got Fraser versus Parker. That one,
Top billing.
yeah,
Absolutely top billing. You see, it's in bold and top. It's on. Yeah.
I don't know about that one. Maybe 20 years ago, but not now. Yeah.
We'll see.
So are there, now you said that there was a couple of other friends. Were there a couple of other friends on the back here that you just want to give a quick shout out to?
Yeah, it got cropped off the end there, but I did give a shout out to him at the end of the comic. Gary King, or Master King, or Grandmaster King in kickboxing. He's one of my best mates, and you know, I've known him for years. We've fought on several world championships together. I was a assistant coach to him on a couple of world championship Australian teams, and yeah, he's just my best mate. So his student, he's actually fighting one of his students there, Luke Watson. Luke had fought
yes.
a couple of Australian, actually would have been the 2007 world championships as well. He ended up running a Muay Thai kickboxing and boxing school for a little while, and Gary has run. Well, he was a kickboxer, a Muay Thai fighter. He's trained with the Thais. He's nominated in the Hall of Fame for the WKA. So he's as I said, a master instructor in Taekwondo. So he's a tough guy, but heart of gold. So he was a shout out there. A couple of guys in the bottom there got a bit cropped off, but a bunch of guys I was giving a shout out to in the that trained at Corporate Box in Brisbane, where I trained for about 5 or 6 years before I moved. But the rest are just classic fights that I enjoyed growing up, you know, and I'm a big Ali fan in particular, so they got the notes on the back as well. So that's pretty much it for there, but there's a couple on the interiors too, like in the actual gym, which the Masked Marvel is passed out on. I've got Mike Tyson versus Donnie Long, and I mainly have that there as it's an in-joke for me and my friends, because Donnie Long, Mike Tyson was an up-and-comer. Donnie Long was supposed to be this coming back in his career, and he was very, very cocky before the fight and then got obliterated. So it was always amusing to us, hence the shout out there. And then, of course, I named some Australian women boxing champions behind.
Talia Harris.
Yeah, Talia Harris. One got cropped out. I couldn't fit in the time. Shannon O'Connell, shotgun, but she's fighting Ebony Bridges, which is also listed there, coming up soon, and then a lot of other women champions listed underneath. Talia Harris, Taylor Harris, sorry. Her and her father used to train at Corporate Box in Brisbane as well. So when she visits the area, she pops in. But the dad I used to see there every Wednesday, hitting pads and doing sparring practice and stuff like that. So
she plays.
And worth noting that at the time of writing, I think she played for the Brisbane Lions women's team as well. She's since changed sides a couple of times since then, I think. But yes, local girl at the obviously local girl, and sounds like you knew the gym she was in. Sorry,
yeah, absolutely. I usually head down, keep to myself. Surprise, surprise, when I go. So I didn't talk to her direct, but I said hello to her dad a few times. So I just want to give a little shout out to some women fighters in the back.
Yeah, no, that's good. Steve, Dan, any other questions or anything about that? I've got a couple of generic fan questions we want to probably finish up on. Anything that we haven't touched upon, or Paul, anything that we haven't asked you that you wanted to raise as well about this issue?
I don't think so. I did have a lot. Originally, it was supposed to be black and white, so I'd finished it and handed it in black and white, and it wasn't until I handed it in about January, February 2020. So it wasn't until late last year I was asked to colour it for the special. That was a minor challenge because I envisioned more of a Raging Bull sort of grayscale treatment to it.
I was about to ask, was that a homage to Raging Bull?
Yeah. So then colouring it was a bit of a challenge, but just trying to give it a scene-by-scene separation and treatment of the colour according to the time of day or where it was sort of situated. So
for just an artistic question then, Paul, like if you put it down or sent it in and then got it back 18 months later to colour in, were you tempted to go back and touch up some line work? Were you critical of your own artwork from 18 months ago, or did you just go, no, I've got to get this coloured? Well,
yeah, I was a bit critical, and yes, there was a couple of faces I touched up here and there, but I didn't want to get lost in the weeds.
Yeah.
While I was juggling other work and uni work and stuff. So and colouring it was like 24 pages plus. I actually went and recoloured the original story cover, which is the Phantom sitting in the locker room sort of thing. So I recoloured that, did a bit of more of a painterly bits on the Phantom. So I try not to noodle with it too much. I figured it is what it is, but there were a couple of faces where I'm like, I might just adjust that line here or there.
The perfectionist in you.
Yeah. But I was still working on other shorts at the time, I think. No, I don't think I was. Oh, I was working on Flock. So I was I wanted to have my energies in my own stuff as well. So, give this a colour treatment and not have to redraw the thing. So
yeah. No, it's just a unique opportunity. I would have thought that it's not often that you get what you thought was the finished work back again to go. Well, obviously it's an addition, but it would have been such a temptation, I would have thought. But yeah, what you say explains it perfectly, that you actually had your own thing that you're more passionate about at the moment. So
yeah, I it's not to say that I skimped on it. I hope that it looks okay. I just thought that it looked fine, except for a couple of bits and pieces in places. And then I got a chance to correct a couple of lines here and there of dialogue if I didn't like what I'd originally said. I think I took a line or two out, and or I fixed up a typo that I'd spotted years later. So
yeah, there you go.
If there's more typos in there, I'll be very disappointed.
Yeah. Also, before I forget, just need to give a bit of a shout out to McCoy Lick, who's got a bit of a mention in the credits as well. He was quite chuffed about that one. So
that's nice. No, I appreciated the cross referencing when I asked you if you knew of any boxing stories, and you said that McCoy had you'd put your heads together. I thought it'd be polite to mention his name there. And of course, because I relied a bit on that Phantom Wiki, I mentioned Marco as well. Except I think Phantom Wiki's gone quiet for quite a while. So
yeah, there's a little bit of update on that, but we'll save that for the next Comics and News podcast.
But it's
just get the listeners interested, eh? Keep them coming
back. Dan or Steve, anything? Dan, Steve, anything you just want to quickly add, or I've got a couple of other questions.
Oh, mate, if I keep talking about Mass Marvel, I'll have nothing to say when we do get to review it in the Comics and News.
anyone who's listened to our podcast would know that can never be true, Dan.
But I like that. It means like on my drive to uni in with traffic, like I've got quite a bit to listen to, and then I can come back and listen to it later. There is a pause button, so
There is a pause button. So, Paul, one of the things I love about boxing is that they always have these weird, cool names. We've got, you know, the Thriller in Manila. You've got the Hitman. You've got all these type of names. What would your fight name be?
It's funny. I've been called the Punisher, you know, sometimes in those days, or Conan the Barbarian. I remember in the World Championships, like in the lead up to some of those, I'd be like when we had like a time to wear like just a t-shirt, I'd just chuck a t-shirt on. I'd have like a Punisher skull on and do my sparring training with that on. So the Punisher. I think Gary's actual fight name was the Punisher as well back in the day. What was the other one? Oh yeah, Conan. I remember doing the big X thing in the 2007 Worlds because I would do the Schwarzenegger impersonation in training. I remember some of the supporters in the crowd yelling out, "Paul, what is best in life?" So it would be there was that, what was the other one? 2013, I think it was we just watched that movie Dredd, which was the Judge Dredd reboot, and we were in team sparring against the Irish team. And the first round, one of our fighters got absolutely poleaxed, like punched around the ring and put under the judges' table. And the referees reminded me of the WWE referees. It would just seem to be anything goes. You know, it was almost like in boxing, the equivalent would be like Frank Cappuccino in a Tyson fight. It's just, you always suspect that maybe the other fighter owes him money or tried to date his sister because he just wouldn't stop the fight, you know. So I was quite frustrated. I looked at the coach and I just said, send me in. So the next fight, they put me in with this guy who's like 6'6", and no respect. Like as soon as they went like go, he just ran at me doing what they call the Irish blitz, where it was just left, right, left, right, left, right. So I just stepped back, jab, jab, cross, and then a left hook. And he let out a little whine. And then just like, you know how you see, like I've had some people fall back like a starfish or like a tree in a forest. This guy like just went limp like a puppet had its strings cut, and he just slumped into the mat. So once I was sent to the neutral corner, and then they came to, and I won the fight. I walked over to my coach and I just whispered in his ear, "Judged," and sat back. I was very upset at that tournament. I'd had a bad draw in the individual events. You know, I came up against a gold medalist in the second or third round, and it was just unfortunate. And this guy that I'd melted into the mat, he was the bronze medalist of the tournament. So sometimes it's just the luck of the draw of what happens on the day, but I got my chance to have a little bit of my own redemption. So Judge Dredd would be the other. This is like the longest answer to the shortest question. I apologize, but I figured since we're on the topic, it's a story that popped in my head when you said the question. So,
well, it's good to give the name context.
Yeah.
So, Steve and Dan, what would your names be?
Oh, mate, wet blanket.
I reckon it would just be, in that case, it would have to be Dan the Man.
Yeah, look, fair to say I get that around.
and Steve, I don't know, Wicked Witch of the East. It's a bit of a
It's not bad.
Steve,
But,
Well,
Like I've always been I've been a WWE fan for ages, and so and when I moved down to Melbourne for a while, I was renowned for being able to drink, and so I got called the Slab for a while. So that was my wrestling name, the Slab.
I like that.
So
The Slab.
whenever I make my character up on on the WWE games, I call him the Slab.
Yeah,
So
Steve the Slab. I
that's
like
the
that.
Slab. But during
Yeah.
in high school when I was playing footy, they were calling me the Iceman because I go through them like an ice pick. Just
There you go. I like that.
Mine would be the Germinator.
The German.
Yeah, okay. Let's set about some of those names. We'll be together. So,
Paul, do you reckon would the Stone for you, would that be a strong name, or Paul the Stone Mason?
Yeah. I like that. Yeah, that's Stone Mason.
chip off the old rock.
Cool. Don't know why I never thought of that. Yeah. We used to, a mate of mine, Luke Watson, his name on the back there, we used to call him Mr. T. And we'd say, like, it's tea time when he'd go into the ring. And we always would say, like, when I'd hold the pads, I'd go, like, 1 lump or 2. And that was very dumb. But anyway.
Have fun with it.
Yeah, you got to play.
no worries. Well, that was different. I don't think we've ever talked about something like that on the podcast before. So, Paul, these are just some generic non-Mass Marvel questions as we're finishing up. Now, you've written, or you've been involved in some of the Kid Fandom, the boxing ones, Vietnam. Is there any other story that you want to write of the Phantom? Is there like a story in you that, I don't know whether you've been bouncing around or whether you've already pitched it, or just something that is like, one day this is the story I'm going to write or the story I'm going to draw?
Yeah, I when I was reading some of the boxing stories, I thought the Crybaby would be a fun follow-up to do.
Yeah.
I liked the Crybaby. I'm doing a at the moment that I'll just say it's probably it's an Australian, set in Australia.
You've already sold extra copies of that.
Well, I don't know yet. Like, it's a bit different. It'll probably be like a meat pie western. So I'm slowly putting that together. But I think I'm going to give it to him in parts. So it'll be like
Does it include the Emmy Wars by any chance?
No. I have a list here of, like, stuck up on the wall of all the proposed stories to do for that Vietnam series. That I think Duncan's the only one that's seen it. So that's kind of my priority there. But I'm always reading old stories, and then if there's little things that I come across, if I don't think it's something that I could possibly touch on within the context of Vietnam, like I did with actually there's a couple of stories that haven't come out yet that have ties to older stories, but there's other stories I wouldn't mind following up in my own way, but a lot of my brain power is in that NAM series at the moment. Wanting to eventually get that into the trade form.
Yeah, that would be awesome.
It'll take a while. I think, but it was. I had a nice conversation with Glenn and Dudley and Duncan and that. I think Jermayn, you're probably in that conversation where I inadvertently pitched the last Vietnam story, and they all said, whatever you got to do to get to that, just do it. Take your time.
It was like you just got
Extensive.
green lit, like they just green lit whatever you wanted to do. Just do it. It was, yeah. And it's probably a good lesson for some of the other creators out there. Take Glenn and Dudley out, get them absolutely plastered.
Get them drunk and
It wasn't my intent. It was just that I think that it all came out of, I wasn't even there to pitch. It just came out of a question of, did you think something with the Phantom in the Ukraine would be appropriate? And I explained why I didn't, but I also explained how I would address that. And it ties in with the ending of the Vietnam War. So from that, we're off to the races. So I will get there eventually, but there's quite a few things. But the beauty part is that I've got bits that kind of touch on characters from Lee Falk's, you know, whether it was a Cy Barry character or a Wilson McCoy or whatever, you know, where it was appropriate, you know, I'll get there. So I guess another long answer. Apart from the Crybaby, which is immediate in my head, you know, there's actually a couple of Team Phantom men. There's a character, the Birdman of Bengali. I wouldn't mind touching on.
Oh, yes.
You know?
Yes. He was a great character.
Great character, yeah.
And it would be right up your alley as well, the whole bit, because you are a Birdman yourself.
Yeah, a little bit. So
a little bit.
Yeah.
A little bit, yeah.
Yeah, no, that would be, because we've seen the end of the Birdman, but we haven't seen the first or the previous interactions with the Phantom.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
There's always ways. That's what it's like, that old question of like, oh, who would win in a fight between, like, you know, Hulk and Superman, and the answer is always whatever the writer decides on the day, you know. So it's an angle.
Yeah, no, that's good. And for the record, your pitch, it was really good. And I know it didn't start off with a pitch, but
it was just me telling the story of what I had in my brain.
Yeah, it was really good. I had to promise, you know, Dudley did say to me, he said, Jermayn, you're not recording anything that's we're talking about. And I'm going, no, I'm not recording it. But I wish I did, because there were some brilliant conversations that were had and the pitch as well. So no, thank you for that.
It was a good.
Yeah. Now, I guess while we're kind of talking about that, what are some underutilized elements of the Phantom that you would like to see visited more or revisited or explored further, whether that's by yourself or by other creators?
For
example, Duncan talked about the Jungle Patrol. That was,
I remember that.
Yeah,
that was a good conversation, and I really I remember I called him after I'd listened to that podcast, and I said that I really liked his thoughts on that. Because I kind of agree. Like, there's elements that you can address there. When he was talking about satellite tech in particular, I did have a story I pitched, but after the fact, I realized that maybe the reason why it wasn't gravitated towards, like, the character's been around for so long, I know that there's heaps of stories I haven't read. So sometimes parallel thinking occurs and you come up with something that's already been done and you just didn't know it. Like that the Vietnam story was a short story I pitched in and amongst a number of different short stories. One of them was like, you know, if I'd had read The Flame, for instance, I wouldn't have pitched it, because it's exactly the same. Like, oh, what if the Phantom became the thing that he hates? You know, a pirate. And then I'm like, oh, yeah. And then the Jungle Patrol thing, I remember doing. It was I pitched a sequel to or a follow up to the Goggle-Dyed Pirates, which was always a cool visual to me. But there's aspects of it that I remember seeing, like a later Sunday strip what was the name of the artist who was very inventive with the layouts of the
Edward Barada.
the strip? I don't know if you.
Eduardo.
That's him. Yeah. So there was a story with the was it the Falk? Not the Falcon. The
Nomad.
It was either the Nomad or the Python. It was the Nomad, and he had that. And Mr. Walker was like in and amongst his tactical group that were trying to find
Shadows Ruin, I think it was, and basically they were hunting the Phantom, and he was the guide.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah. So I'd pitched a story with it was the Goggle-Dyed Pirates, because if you remember that story, they found out a lot about where the Phantom is and all this sort of stuff and the lore behind it. So I figured he's in prison and he was a man of resources, so he probably ended up paying for a private group, special forces, ex-special forces, to go and infiltrate the deep woods. But the visual was, the bandar were picking them off one by one without the lead guy realizing. So by the time that he emerged from underneath the waterfall, and he looks to his left and his right, and he can't see any of these other teammates, and there's just goggles floating in the water around him.
Oh, that's cool.
That was sort of the idea I was sort of looking at. But I managed to use some of those elements of what eventually happens in that story in one of the NAM stories I handed in recently. So it's there's always, even if stories aren't sort of picked up, or there's elements that you find that you always find the elements that might be different, and then you can recycle them elsewhere if they so fit. You might write a line of dialogue or draw a particular panel that you go, I really like this, but for this story it doesn't work, so I might save it till somewhere else.
Yeah.
But in terms of anything else underutilized, I don't know. I haven't gone back through all the old stories to kind of see. I thought some of the visuals of the original first Phantom, I'm sure someone's done a series. If not Team Phantoman, I would have imagined have done more stories with that character. But I thought that there's some interest there. I'd have to think harder about it, I suppose. I just take it as it comes in that regard.
No worries. So a question that I like to ask a lot of people is, how do we get new fans? Now, we're not young anymore, the four of us. We like to probably still pretend we are, but we're still, for a lot of, if you look at the demographic of a lot of fans, we're still classified as young Phantom fans, which when you're nearing 40, it's not really a good sign. So how can we get some new fans? How can we get some readers? What can we do? And then, without annoying people that pay your bills, how can the publishers and how could KFS do it?
Look, that's a tricky question. I'm a firm believer of what John Cleese often says, is that nobody knows anything. So it's all about that trial and error aspect to things, There was a lot of things that I remember Duncan saying that I kind of agreed with. Like in my thoughts in terms of Australian comics is not necessarily a problem with the material. It's just a problem with the culture of reading comics to begin with. Like there's more of a larger culture of comic reading in other countries. The problem isn't necessarily is it black and white or is it color, because manga is one of the biggest selling things in the world, and the majority of that's black and white. So I always feel like that argument is a bit nonsense as well. Having said that, it depends on the country as to what they gravitate towards. So I get that as well. But even art style, and I've had my fair share of critics when it comes to art style because of the Kid Phantom run, which, really the criticism came from the older audience that it wasn't made for. I went to a book week this week down at the school in Currumbin, and they've been circulating fandoms in the classrooms of year 5 and year 6 kids. So, it's not necessarily per se. I think it's just a cultural and an advertising issue, because Marvel and DC have the same dramas, and I think their corporate overlords also have similar concerns that they end up just using the material IP development for the material that they know is going to sell, which is primarily, subscription services for their television stations, movies and video games. So it's a difficult dilemma. I think sometimes it could be the product itself. So if there was someone with a lot of money and very willing to throw it away into an incinerator, who is willing to try and change the culture, or at least tap into a certain part of the demographic or the market in some way, like just find your niche. I mean, there has to be some percentage of people that would be interested in reading the material if they know where to get it, and maybe even more of a easier access to it. So a reintroduction to a proper digital platform to do that. And I don't think Comixology is the key right now, because they kind of nuked themselves. I think that's the only way to kind of get that, audience remembering what it is and seeing the product and sampling the product and getting involved in that regard. I don't know. It's a complicated problem that's multi-pronged.
And there's no one silver bullet as well.
Yeah. I think it is a generational thing. We all know this. We know that what helps it is the hand-me-down aspect to the character and the nature. I think something successful in the popular zeitgeist would definitely help, because even if there's no direct correlation between sales of a particular book and a movie coming out, generally speaking, though, if the movie's very good and they make another one, it starts to catch on, and then there's always a sort of an uptick in that product. DC have a myriad of different characters, but when it comes down to it, anything that's not Batman doesn't necessarily sell for them. And generally speaking, the Batman movies tend to be of better quality. And then therefore the books attract better writers and better artists, and it all sort of has that cascading effect. Perhaps something similar in regards to the Phantom would be great, but we don't necessarily have that driving force behind it. It's a, you guys know better than anybody that it's hard to just sort of sit on an IP and license it out, as opposed to maybe putting some investment behind it. But maybe that's asking, throwing their IPs become successful, and then ultimately on whether they release things or do more stuff. I mean, look at Discovery, Warner Brothers Discovery this last couple of weeks, where they axed the release of a couple of big films that were almost finished for nothing more than a tax write-off, rather than seeing if the material is good.
How
or
sad is
it will
that?
generate more readers. If you worked on the film, you'd be gutted, or the films, I should say, because there was a few of them. So it's it's like South Sydney, for instance. When they first got kicked out of the comp and then brought back, it was all great, but then success or lack of success on the field didn't generate any interest in the property or in the team, until you had someone with a lot of influence and a lot of cash willing to lose a bit of it in the interim in order to pull it out of where they were and get it to somewhere successful in years to come. which was like Russell Crowe and Peter Holmes Accord, and then now like James Packer is involved and that sort of thing. And they turned it into a professional outfit. They put effort into the quality uniforms and the suits that the players wear, the merchandise and the material that's put out. You can't necessarily just license it to any old people and expect that it's going to catch fire in one area. You need to be multi-pronged in that regard. So it's tricky. I've seen publishers in Australia start off and then after a while realise that they're not reaching their audience even through the news agent system, which is an outdated system. I mean, Marvel and DC haven't been there in nearly 20 years, so it's hard.
So do you think having a US publisher is important and is key? Obviously, they got to do the job correctly. Like, Moonstone did a good job, and then Herms with their new stuff, and then even Dynamite with their new stuff was very hit and miss.
I don't know. I like Marvel and DC aren't selling the amount of numbers that they used to years ago. When you think about it in terms of comic book professionals, how many positions are there really in the American comic book industry? Maybe 200, 300 people at most have gigs, and maybe only a handful of those, if that, are top tier talent, and everyone else is just scrounging for, a position somewhere. It's difficult where editors are moved around and publishers, I mean, I perhaps would see it as maybe even like I'm not saying this just because I did Kid Phantom, but like Scholastics, for instance, sell millions of copies of like Dogman and those Catman things, and not to disparage the work, because I believe that the art direction must match the context of the work and the audience that it's pitched at, but it looks like it's made in crayons and it's drawn like a child has drawn it. And it resonates with a kid because it's aspirational in that regard. Rob Liefeld's work, for better or for worse, in American comics is very similar, because it's aspirational for those young kids that can draw similar to that style. So maybe it's not necessarily a comic publisher per se, but more like one of your classic book publishers that can reach a younger audience through schools and school magazines or something along those lines.
That's where
maybe even a Japanese publisher.
Yeah, that's where it must have been a surreal experience to. Sorry, Paul, to jump in, but must have been a surreal experience to go to a book week where your comics are front and center. Can you tell us a little bit about that? The trip to the school this week.
Oh yeah, so that was fun. That came out of a project club attached to the school. It's run by volunteers who are ex-teachers, and this lovely lady named Sandra contacted me while going through the Writers' Centre, not the Writers' Centre, the Writers' Festival guests. I was asked to be a guest on a comics panel at the Writers' Festival this year, and I think they might have seen that from either a class that I'd done at the Queensland Writers' Centre last year, or maybe even through getting that award for the Vietnam story for the Ledger Awards a couple of years ago in the pandemic. So I think it all sort of cascades from there. But they asked if I wanted to, drive down to the school and do some classes, and where could they get the books. So I gave him Frew's contacts, and I believe the club ordered some books, just a handful, and I left a few with them. I left them a trade paperback. I think I left them issue 9 and 10, and an issue of Flock, and the Flock Kickstarter came with a process book of how it was made, which I think they were really happy to have. And I also gave out a couple of Phantom comics because I heard there was a few older Phantom fans that would have loved to have come along, but they were no longer able to leave the house. So I signed a couple of copies and sent them off. And one young kid got pulled out of class early and he was very disappointed. So I gave him a copy of the Phantom in Vietnam, 1905, because we were talking about Terminator before the class started, and I pointed to that motorcycle scene because I loved the Terminator as a kid.
Very cool.
So yeah, that was a fun day. Showed him Cheezel in the fun. So yeah, it was nice to have kids that the comic resonated with. Like even earlier in the year when I was at the Brisbane Oz Comic Con, the homegrown, there was no guests. It was Jamie Johnson and myself were in the comics booth, and the number of kids that came up with not Kid Phantom but just that regular 1905 issue that said that they enjoy these stories. That was nice. So it's not like it's not happening. I know that there's young fans out there that are 8, 9, 10-year-olds who are finding it somehow. We just need more connection to that, and it would take a lot of money and a lot of time, not just Facebook, unfortunately. So it's tricky.
Yeah. Well, let's ensure that Frew master Facebook first, and then they can go on to the others.
Absolutely. Look, as I said, I've always admired Frew for being industrious and punching way above their weight. And I hope that fans here don't take that for granted, like the work that like Glenn and Dudley and the Frew crew, Rene, have that connection to, the work that they all do to keep things running. Like I said it to Glenn at the dinner recently, because I nominated him for a Platinum Award and nothing ever came to it. But I said, I hope people realize how, valuable you are, not only as a Phantom creator in his own right, and who's very, very humble about it too. We joke about everything being signed by him, but when it comes down to it, like he doesn't write, like he's always pushing other creators forward. And just listening to like Danny Picciotto's speech and several other artists previous, like, apart from America where you have the opportunity to touch base with an editor and get work, like to have someone at a con say, I like what you're doing, would you like to do a cover for us? Like that doesn't happen in Australia.
Yeah.
Like that's why there's so many, fan artists putting out prints at a con, because one, it's easy, and two, there's no litigation or you're not going to have issues with people wandering around. So you can it's kind of a little bit like the Wild West in that way. So to have someone like Glenn who sort of champions local creators in that fashion and puts people forward, and professionals like Jason Polos and then like up and comers, or people that haven't worked, like like Grange was an illustrator in other fields and was translated over to doing covers and stuff like that. Like, that's I think that's pretty rad. So I appreciate what Frew try to do with the limited time and how that.
Also, you got your real young upcoming ones like Alex Tripp and stuff like that as well. Yeah,
lovely people too. Like it's nice to meet them and touch base with them. And what I particularly liked too is seeing a lot of the female artists have front recently with those covers as well. I appreciate the fact that Glenn gives Amanda an opportunity to do some work and flex her writing and like her editing, because her degree is in public relations and stuff like that. She's very savvy and doesn't get to use that skill set very often. So, she's an asset to what I do with my work. Make sure that my sentences make sense, and then to have people like Dudley who wears his heart on his sleeve and is very astute, yeah, it's I'm very appreciative of all that in regards to what we're all trying to do. I think it's difficult given the nature of the character being around for so long, but not having that background that the Marvel or the DC characters have. But you know, I think that it is a testament to these guys still pushing, and still injecting some sort of life into it going forward. So.
Exactly. Yeah, completely agree. Dan, Steve, anything else you just want to add or ask about Mass Marvel or anything else generally? Paul, anything that you wanted to quickly say? Anyone you want to say thanks to or a shout out?
Well, thank you guys. I you know, to give us a platform to discuss this stuff and reach other like-minded people. It's very kind. And
Our pleasure.
you know, reviewing the work as well, you know, and there's always smart things to say about the work. Actually, now that you mention it too, I know that you were talking earlier about if there was things that I thought were underutilized with the Phantom. I just want to circle back to Andrew Constant's robot Phantom. I think there's something there. I know it rubs people the wrong way, but there's plenty of potential there. But
To
anyway,
be honest, I actually think that story has been received better than what I think a lot of people actually expected. I think people expected that to rub a lot of people up and get a lot of people upset, but people are kind of like, yeah, I think like people are a lot more open to it than what I assumed.
And it's different, and like Duncan said regarding continuity, like even Lee Falk didn't let continuity get in the way of a good story. Look at the Mass Marvel I talked about in the article, that this story inherently breaks the character. If it was to follow continuity, the next story and subsequent stories would all be busted, because here's the most famous man on the planet, the world heavyweight champion, fighting gangsters and pirates. Like, it's just...
Yeah, I'll be like, oh, before you punch me, can I get you to sign this form?
yeah. Like I said in the article, like, it'd be like you're trying to rob a bank, and then all of a sudden, like, you know, WWE's Hulk Hogan busts in the wall. Put that gun down, brother. You know, and then like,
I'll tell you something, Mean Gene.
Yeah, exactly. You know, so yeah, it'd be bizarre. Like, I actually, in my head, I've always wanted to do a story where Muhammad Ali wears a suit and tie and goes around, solves crime. But yeah, so, just anyway. But yeah, like that's the but it doesn't, even like the heavyweight champ, like that's a fun story, a bit rapey, but doesn't address this particular story either. It's just it's self-contained in itself. So I feel like there's room for those sorts of stories, provided that you don't get too hung up on where does this sit. You know, continuity is fun, and I myself know that I walk a very fine tightrope with like the Vietnam stuff. But I feel like if you can just accept that this guy has this longevity through the ages and it's updated for the next audience that comes along, and you just enjoy the story for what it is, then you have a much better time than pulling your hair out saying, oh, this doesn't work. You know, it's the problem that Marvel will have with Peter Parker. That's why they, it imploded his marriage, and then for years it's always that, well, won't they get back together again, or they won't, or maybe they will and then they won't, and then Dr. Octopus is back again. You know what I mean? So it's always that never-ending nature of comics being in a perpetual Act 2. So every now and again it's nice to see the final act and see what it might be, you know, just for what it is. Otherwise, we'll just get repetition of origin stories over and over, because usually those are the stories that resonate the most with people.
Yeah.
But the beauty part about Phantom is that there's at least 22, 23 people in the costume that we know of that we can tell different stories about. You know?
Yeah. Well, I appreciate your time tonight, Paul. Appreciate your thoughts about the Masked Marvel, about your love of boxing, but also of the Phantom, and then talking, you know, a lot about nothing, but a lot about something.
Yeah, it's true. I apologize. The problem is, gents, that I rarely talk to anyone in a day apart from, you know, Amanda. So you catch me where all my internal thoughts are just spitting out.
That's all right. That's what this podcast is all about. It's we get a lot of comments that it's, as you would expect, a conversation, you know, at a coffee bar or at a bar, or where it's just mates chatting Phantom, chatting stuff that you enjoy. And that's the way we try and do this podcast, because that's about all we're good at. We probably couldn't do it anyway else. So thank you, Paul. If you enjoyed this podcast, we are on our website, which is chroniclechamber.com. If you want to email us, or if there's any questions that you that we haven't asked, you can email us at chroniclechamber@gmail.com. We're on social media. We're on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Before I go any further, Paul, do you want to let the audiences know how people can find you?
Yeah, you can Google me. No, you can just you can just go to masoncomics.com.au. All my social media stuff is on there as well. Instagram, Twitter, Facebook. Not on TikTok. Can't dance. But if you do want to look at some pages of different projects and things and information, videos, past interviews of bullshit, my website's a shrine to my wankery. Mainly there for when because university requires you to interact with your community and have a presence and have some sort of presence with your work. So it was a perfect excuse to have all that bullshit up there. So.
Well, thank you, Paul, very much for interacting with us. As said, I hope that ticks a box for you at uni. I am looking forward to seeing the hints you've dropped there about NARM stories coming. I do enjoy seeing those when they come, so looking forward to that. Chapter 2 of the Flock as well. Can't wait to see that one, and I'm really excited about the crossover Terminator story you've kind of pitched there, where Robot Phantom battles Skynet. So looking forward to that one.
That's cool. I should also shout out Jermayn. You mentioned that other Kickstarter. That was for Talgard, another Gestalt book. That Flock is the Gestalt publishes Flock, but a book with a lot of actual Phantom cover artists in that book as well. So like Lauren Marshall, and
good Perth
I
girl.
think either the first or this chapter has. Gary Challoner, I believe, is in that book too. Tim McEwen, who some of the Phantom readers will know of.
Yep.
And a few other creators in there of note, both up and coming, established, internationals as well. All have done little short 4 pages in Gary Paradley's Barbarian anthology featuring the character Talgard. So if you're familiar with Rich Kid book that I did, the colorist works on that as well, Justin Randall. So
yep.
So
Justin Randall is actually one of my uni lecturers.
Yeah, cool. At Curtin?
At Curtin, over here in Perth.
Yep.
So, yeah. And then Tim McEwen, I believe, from memory, he was actually a guest at a Phantom Lee Falk dinner. Like back in the early days before I attended to any of them.
Yep. Yep, that's it. Artist on Greener Pastures, an Australian
Yes,
comic.
he's got the hardest to find Phantom card, which is the bull dressed up as the Phantom.
Yes.
And I think that's because he got all copies and then he sat on them for 10 years and then sold them for a pretty penny.
That's how you do it. I think that's what I'm going to do with my Kid Phantom artwork. I'll just sit on it until it's actually worth something. So, or maybe not. Might not be worth anything, but we'll see. But it's a good plan.
No worries. Well, thank you for joining us. Again, our website, chroniclechamber.com, email chroniclechamber@gmail.com. We're on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. Please subscribe to us via either YouTube or your favorite podcast apps. Rate us, give us 5 stars, tell a mate about us, and all that type of stuff. Make sure you follow Paul Mason on social media and everything as well. Dan, Steve, thank you for joining us. Listeners, hopefully we've had some audio technical difficulties during this podcast, so hopefully it hasn't affected it too much. Thank you for listening to us. From myself, happy fans.
Happy fandoming.
I must eradicate piracy, injustice, and
Happy fandoming.
cruelty, and all my sons will follow me, so evildoers will believe that this man cannot die. The Phantom, the ghost who walks. The Phantom, enemies beware. The Phantom's always there, but you won't find the Phantom. He finds